now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes, 9 minutes after 6. Always feels at this time on a Monday as if the weekend was so very long ago as you're on your way home. I imagine that is absolutely how you feel. Well, I've been trying to sort of put my cynical hat away and sort of stuff it in its box for the conversation around the ANC and their new economic plan. But it's one of those caps, my cynical cap, that keeps bursting out. It's almost like Harry Potter finds its way back onto my head and sort of stays there. And I say that because we've had ANC economic plan, followed by ANC economic plan, followed by ANC economic plan. And today I was watching the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, as he was speaking at the end of the ANC's National Executive Committee. And in a way, I can't help but wonder if there's a big credibility problem here. The plans on the face of it, I can't see any argument with them. We'll get an expert view from Dr. Iraj Abedian in just a moment. But I think the problem, and we'll ask Ferial Haffajee this too, is if anyone believes that anything will actually change. And isn't this the problem? Sort of brand ANC has found itself without legitimacy at the moment. Now, that may be unfair to the current leadership, but that's just the way things are. Well, we'll focus on that in a moment. Discovery Green, they're the energy trader. Yes, of course, they are related to Discovery. They've signed a deal with Glencore, so it's a renewable energy supply deal, and they will supply Glencore's coal mining operations. Yeah, the irony struck me too. There's a lot going on there, but it is also the way in which the world is going. More and more electricity being traded in different ways. You've got to wheel it, move it, transmit it, distribute it through the national grid and actually get it there. But looking forward to that conversation with Nepgen, the head of Discovery Green, in a couple of moments. Also, of course, conversations to come around. I found this amazing, and it may well depend on whether you are someone who wants to do this or not. So imagine this situation, right? You are in a property, you've bought a property in sectional title, you are in a residential estate, and you suddenly start to notice that your neighbors are never there over the weekend, but other people are. There's always someone. Maybe they're a bit younger than the owners. Maybe they like a party. Maybe they have friends round. Maybe they use all of the facilities. They're always in the communal swimming pool or whatever it is. They're sort of taking it over. And you notice that more and more of your neighbors, this is happening to their properties. And suddenly you realize, that when you suddenly realize what's going on. And you realize they're actually letting out their properties on Airbnb over weekends or holidays or long weekends, or there's a particular facility at your residence, at your residential estate that you moved in to use, but now you find that your neighbors are renting out their properties on Airbnb, and as a result it's too full, or you don't really want to take the kids or the grandkids down to the communal pool or lagoon or whatever it is anymore, because there are young people there and there's alcohol and music, and that just wasn't the vibe that you wanted. Or you could see that other people are doing it and decide to do it yourself. It's the Great Divide. It was a big Cape Town divide, I must just say. There's some suburbs where people complain that, in fact, every property is rented out on Airbnb and no one can actually live there anymore. And there does seem to be some evidence of that. But that divide has come to Gauteng. We will talk about that in a while. I don't know how you feel about it. Is Airbnb, renting out your property, something you've done, something you wish you could do, or something you would never do? 011 8830 702 021 446 0567. And we'll talk about AI and authenticity. And what happens when people realize the person they were speaking to isn't a person, but it was actually just a piece of code. 011 8830 702 021 446 0567. Where are you in the Airbnb debate? Your voice notes too, please, on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, a big promise from President Cyril Ramaphosa today, in which he said the ANC's National Executive Committee had decided over the weekend to adopt a new plan to grow the economy. He says they'll ensure there's more investment in infrastructure, there'll be cheaper electricity to help smelters produce chrome and other alloys, a big push to find new trading partners partners, particularly on our continent, and a plan to grow the economy outside the major centres, so to develop the more rural provinces. Ramaphosa also reaffirming the ANC's commitment to broad-based black economic empowerment. Well, we start the reaction to that with Dr. Iraj Abedian, CEO at Pan-African Investments and Research Services. Iraj, good evening. If we accept these plans at face value, if we just look at what's been given to us, would they work and help to grow the economy?
Good afternoon, Stephen, and good afternoon to our listeners. It will not do what the president hopes that it will achieve, because there is nothing new here. Remember, 13 years ago, the development plan promised a capable state. 13 years later, the state has, I would argue, become weaker, by president's own admission. The fact that the president says we have to establish, or ANC resolved that there should be a war room in the presidency, it means that the departments individually and as they are dysfunctional. They are not coordinating. The subcommittees of the cabinet that was focusing on sectoral coordination and policy alignments, they have become either disbanded or dysfunctional. So I think that's a real problem, because the president says it's implementation. But how do you implement when you don't have the skills, the capacity, the systems? That's really the message that I read in the president's message to the nation.
I mean, the fact that Operation Vulindlela exists is kind of proof of that, isn't it? It's doing what normal government departments should be doing.
Absolutely. And then, and of course, thank God that at least Operation Vulindlela has done something, not nearly as much and as fast as they should have and they could have. But that in itself, again, shows that however much those who are members of this team or is the structure within the presidency, when they go back to the departments, when they assign action plans to respective departments, some departments are limping badly, so they are behind the schedule. So I think that is really, really the hub of the matter. And of course, the fact that there is an assumption here that by stating that we will make a capable state or government operational efficiency, whatever label they put on it, that this is something that can be done quickly. I was hoping, Stephen, that the president would focus on those things and say, as a result of it, we have decided the following ministers have to go because they are compromised, inefficient, and out. The following DGs and chief directors, whoever they've been identified that have been non-delivery, incapable, incompetent, they will be sacked from tomorrow and they'll be replaced within a week. If he had gone that route, then he would have introduced something new, some sense of urgency, some sense of commitment, and some, if you like, political determination to do what he would like to do.
Some of the plans involve difficult trade-offs, and there's a classic trade-off. So he wants to give smelters cheaper electricity, which means that everyone else has to pay more for electricity. I'm not convinced, and I'm sorry to say this, but I'm not convinced that government or the ANC can really force those trade-offs. There will be a big reaction to that.
Yeah, we had for years, and this is not a new debate, Stephen, aluminium smelters in Natal had terribly cheap energy, but that was at the time that we had the coal generation capacity, cheap coal. We could actually throw cheap at it and generate cheap and then export. And there was a big political issue at that time. And then, of course, how do you go? If the smelters have to get it, why not mining companies? If the mining, and how long is a piece of a string? Where do you stop? And the second issue, possibly more importantly, is the fact that because 10 years ago, Eskom forced these smelters to close down, there are now others who in other destinations, in other countries, are doing what our smelters used to do. And there are contracts in place. There is no necessarily, and we are not going to be able to compete with the ones that are in, let's say, Malaysia or in Korea or somewhere in Vietnam or China or wherever they are. So I think that's another issue that is sort of assumed that by offering cheap energy, the problem will be solved. Cheap energy is one of the requirements, but functioning functioning railways or cargo particularly is another, harbors is another one, and so it goes. So it's a string of things that have to be done to make smelters again globally competitive.
Dr. Iraj Abedian, thank you. CEO at Pan-African Investments and Research Services. You with The Money Show, 19 minutes after 6. Ferial Haffajee is an associate editor at Daily Maverick. Ferial, good afternoon. Nice to have you on The Money Show. Do you think an ANC leader, after everything that's happened over the last 30 years, can stand up and convince the nation that they're finally serious about growing the economy, or was simply too much happened?
Good evening, Stephen. I must say, when I listened to the president, I got a feel of a very, very tired leader. And so a lot in this is not new, like Iraj said. And that perhaps is a good thing. You don't want wild swings in your economic policy by what is still the largest party in the country and the one that has its hands on trade and industry, the treasury, and all the key economic departments. On the one hand, it's a good thing. On the other hand, I didn't hear anything that said we're going to make changes significant enough to move the dial, because Operation Vulindlela, certainly with the government partnership, you've seen largely the end of load shedding. You do have those 11 corridors opening up to the private sector on the national rail service, on the national rail network, and that's a great thing. But otherwise, I felt like it was not sufficient.
We've had an economic growth problem for such a long time. I mean, let's just say for 20 years. Why do you think the ANC is making this promise now? This problem has been obvious for a long time. I mean, the president's been in power since 2018. Suddenly we have a big speech like this today.
Well, we've got a lot of big events coming up. National General Council of the ANC at the end of the year. That's usually you get a sense of whether the president's going to last the term at that one. We've got a local government election next year, and the second biggest party, the DA, is out of the blocks, and like you wrote today, the ANC is still pretty far behind. And then almost straight after that, we head into the provincial and national elections. So I think we're firmly in electioneering season.
Ferial Haffajee, always good to hear from you. Thank you so much. Associate Editor at Daily Maverick, 21 minutes after 6.
7:02. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, confirmation today, Glencore signing a deal with Discovery Green. Discovery Green will supply Glencore's coal mines with renewable energy. Andre Nepgen is the head of Discovery Green. Andre, good evening. Welcome back to The Money Show. I found it difficult to avoid the irony, I'm afraid. You're supplying renewable energy to help someone mine coal.
I get the irony, but I think it's actually very progressive and wonderful to see.
It's a 20-year deal. Where are you getting the power from? Who are you buying it from? You have to buy it from someone.
Absolutely. So we, earlier this year, we started construction on our first, we started alongside, through Red Rocket, a IPP, a wind farm, and recently we closed another project with Red Rocket, a 300 megawatt solar project in the Mpumalanga area. So the power construction is on its way.
You have to use the national grid to develop that power, to wheel that power. Is all of that going to work okay? I mean, have you had any issues with deals and sort of arranging all of that?
No, not. So generally you don't start these projects until you have certainty around your ability to connect to the grid. I think it goes without saying, and I think everyone's aware that grid is running scarce at the moment, but there's a lot of development currently underway to try and develop more grid for people to connect it. But it's important you don't start these projects until you know you can evacuate the energy, and for these ones we can.
I imagine this might be one of the bigger deals you're doing at the moment, Andre. You would have seen there's a lot of talk about smelters at the moment, whether Eskom will ever have enough electricity for smelters. Do you think it might one day be possible for you to source enough renewable power to supply a smelter, or is that still 20 or 30 years away?
No, I don't think so. I think one day we'll get to a world where a big part of the energy will come from renewable energy. But I think one thing you have to keep in mind is that when it comes to renewable, you are reliant on the wind blowing and the sun shining. So there's always a need for supply technologies, batteries, base load, coal. gap. You need a combination to make these things work. But one day I do think, renewable energy penetration within the country would be substantial enough that you see a decent quantum of a smelter running on that energy.
I've been watching, and we've been watching on the Money Show very closely, what was Eskom's opposition to NERSA's decision to grant four energy traders, I think including you, if I recall correctly, licenses to operate. We spoke to the CEO, Dan Marikane, on the Money Show last week. He said they hadn't sort of dropped the challenge. They do want what they see as fair rules for everyone, which I suppose does make sense. How worried are you about that? I mean, that would have a very big impact on you, and the rules aren't really set in stone yet.
It's so aware that they've stayed their challenge. I think their challenge is always on the basis that that these trading rules were in an environment where the tariffs don't necessarily reflect the dynamics in the market, which makes sense. I think the one thing we have to keep in mind, Stephen, is that we sort of year one in a liberalized market. We've got 102 years of a certain way of doing things in the way the market operated. In year one, and South Africa is taking liberalization by the horns. So things are moving rapidly, and I think we just need to make sure that all the right rules and mechanisms and tariffs are reflective of what needs to happen in order for everyone to operate. I don't think it should stall the reform agenda. We just need to accelerate the development of the rules. So I think we're getting closer and closer to a competitive market, which is exciting.
Andre Nepgen, thanks very much indeed. Really appreciate it. Head of Discovery Green, 26 minutes after 6.
The Money Show.
The Markers.
Meryl Peck is Portfolio Manager at Old Mutual Investments. Meryl, good evening. Wow. Mondi down, what was it, 16, 17% on the day. And that was just really on their own update.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen, and good evening to the listeners. At close, it was down 16.5%. I'm not sure what, in terms of the volume-weighted average, but very big move and took SAPI down with it. So SAPI closed 11.5% down. And this was a kind of a trading update. We didn't get very specific guidance, but a bit of an update saying that some of the outlook for the projects that are ramping up, the benefits from those projects will be delayed. Some of the price increases that they've received from customers in the past few months seem to have been given back, so they've seen price declines. And volumes are quite low. So the paper industry, particularly in Europe, is facing a oversupply situation at this point. At the same time, I suppose risks are mounting for global growth. We've seen French political turmoil unfold over the last few days. U.S. government shutdown has potential impact on jobs. So I think these are very cyclical industries, and I think anything dampening the growth outlook is negative, especially in an industry where there is quite a lot of overcapacity. And supply is slower to exit in Europe because the paper industry is quite fragmented compared to the US, where it's almost more of an oligopoly, so more of a rational market. For a patient investor, we think that this would potentially make quite a reasonable entry point, attractive entry point into Mondi on any metric that you look at, margins, returns. We are very clearly at a cyclical low. The question you cannot answer is how long do we stay at this cyclical low for, and I suppose today many investors decided to walk away for something that can deliver a return tomorrow. But Mondi is one of the higher quality paper producers. They are a very low cost producer. So if you want to, in a cyclical industry, play the last man standing game, Mondi does not have to shut capacity to stay afloat. The higher cost producers in the industry need to exit, but it's a question of timing.
I mean, and at the other end of the scale, you talk about a cyclical market is gold. I mean, it's kind of knocking on the door of $4,000 an ounce, which I'm so bored with this, but I've run out of so many words to sort of describe gold at the moment.
Absolutely. It does. Looking at the futures pricing, it looks like easily you could wake up tomorrow morning and see a gold price of $4,000. It's quite phenomenal. I think from the September 2022 low of about $1,635 per ounce, I think we're up now somewhere around 140%. Believe it or not, that's not the biggest move in gold that we've seen kind of just in the 2000s. We saw a bigger move in 2001 and 2008. Obviously, those would ring a bell as high crisis moments. This is now the third one. Those two, and then 2025, that stand out as the biggest and longest gold bull runs since 1971. So we are certainly in a record-breaking territory. Depending on the inflation number you use, we've also blown through the highest inflation-adjusted price on record that was set in the 1980s. So it does feel like we are in that uncharted waters. But you've got high debt level in the US. You've got yet another government shutdown. You've got increasing geopolitical instability. So it's not hard to understand how we got here. But it is difficult to. You cannot say that gold is cheap. You cannot also call with certainty that this is the top, but we're much closer to the top than we are to the bottom, that's for sure.
Meryl Peck, thanks very much indeed. Portfolio manager at Old Mutual Investments. I think gold is just astonishing at the moment.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
22 minutes to 7. Well, you heard conversations around the ANC, and I've been trying to put my cynical hat away, but it keeps popping back on my head again, around their latest economic plan. Also, of course, talking about the great Airbnb debate tonight.
Yes, good evening, man. Look, this whole thing of the presidency, what is it called them? War room, as you guys, Abedian said, it then shows or confirms that the people that are supposed to be there to do the actual work are not doing the actual work. Otherwise, this has to be the biggest bloated presidency in South African democratic times. You've got Vulindela, you've got this task team, you've got this envoy, you've got, so yeah, I don't know. Even the plans, I'm just figuring out it might be things that they should have been doing in any case, but now they're coming, they're recreating something that should be on a day-to-day scope of their work. But yeah, it is what it is. Let's wait and see. Kiki.
Hey, 702. Hey, that whole Airbnb situation. Honestly, I don't agree with how Airbnbs are. Because all they do is they force short-term renting. So then people that may have to, they're starting life, they need to, start saving up money so they could probably have their own home. They're probably forced to pay higher rates because, you can charge more for short-term rentals because, you can barely have people in. But honestly, I think it's a terrible thing and we should clamp down on it and force people to not use their properties as investments because then that kind of forces the regular person to be paying more.
Well, good luck with that. I hear your pain, but are you going to tell me what to do with my property? I can just imagine the fights that would emerge. Ruby on the WhatsApp line saying, regarding Airbnb, a special general meeting can be called. This is in a complex, obviously. And if it's agreed not to have the units rented out on a short-term basis, the conduct rules can be changed. We did that in our complex because of safety issues. Well, more on that conversation in just a moment.
702 Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
14 minutes to 7. Now, I don't live in a sectional title complex. I don't live in a residential estate. And that comes with two things. On the one side, it means I can make my own rules for my own pool. And on the other side, it means I have to keep my own pool blue. And there are times when I'd certainly trade one for the other. But I'm always interested in the disputes that can emerge in these complexes, and some of them can actually be quite difficult. You can see that people move out, they end up on page 3 of the Sunday Times because it all goes to court, and one of them is now involving Balwin Properties. They've developed the Blyde Riverwalk estate in Tshwane. It includes a massive lagoon in the middle. The idea is, as I understand it, to bring the beach to Pretoria. One group of residents is now letting out their homes through Airbnb and making a fortune. The other group wants to stop them. The person who's brought this story to light is Roy Cockayne, a contributor to MoneyWeb. Roy, good evening. These things in sectional title complexes, they can get pretty hectic pretty quickly. How did Balwin get stuck in the middle of this?
Well, Balwin is one of the largest home builders in South Africa, and if you look at what they've developed around Waterfall in Midrand, there's a huge amount of residential developments they've done there. And to the best of my knowledge, that also has a lagoon in it, but it's only available to the residents. As far as I know, at the Blyde initially, that I think there might have been some access that was allowed to the general public for a fee, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But that's only the lagoon's only part of the problem, because it's really about short-term rentals and what control you have over whoever's staying in that unit. If you've got an owner, you've got some action you can take against them, but it's a bit difficult when you've got someone who's staying in it for 3 days and you don't even know who they are.
Don't most complexes, when this sort of problem happens, they settle it through a vote? This is quite a big complex, and that could be quite difficult here.
Well, the procedure is normally laid down in the Constitution, and the Constitution will provide the rules that have to be followed. And, in any process, there needs to be a sort of public consultation process, which would mean talking to the owners and explaining what is happening. And in the Blyde, because it's not nearly completed. I think they've only finished 14 phases or 49 phases. The developers have an overwhelming vote, so they can carry most votes. But in the instance of the Blyde, the owners that indulged in short-term letting, they were successful in their complaint to the Community Schemes Ombudsman Service, where they found that the general meeting hadn't been properly managed, and also that the vote was void. Apparently, at the general meeting, only 53% of the owners voted in favour of the new rule, where the rules of the scheme required 75% of owners to vote in favour of such a resolution for it to be passed. So, ultimately, if the owners decide the owners actually decide what they want.
There can be a lot of money in this. I mean, if you have 100 owners, they all put their units out for a weekend on Airbnb, they're making a lot of money, and they're not going to give that up very easily. And the owners of the units around them will feel that they're losing money or that they're losing quality of life, and they're not going to take that lying down. I mean, the potential is here for a real fight.
Well, there is, but, again, it will come down to the rules, and whoever has the most votes in terms of, or gets the required majority votes, that will be what will happen there, and then the owners who are unhappy with whatever the decision will have to take their own decisions on what they're going to do. I don't know if these people are making a lot of money out of this. They might just be using the short-term rentals to actually pay off that unit and having a second property and a second income.
I mean, I would imagine lots of other complexes in Gauteng are going to have to deal with this at some point. I imagine it's worth having the meeting before it comes up. And even then, once you've had it, people will change their minds if they spot an opportunity.
Oh, it's always a good thing that you actually have the rules laid down early. There is some precedent for what's happening in this case, and that was, I think it was in 2019, there was a case in the High Court where the body corporate decided they were going to prohibit short-term letting in their rules. One of the owners actually objected to that, but was unsuccessful. So I think that, when you're in a complex, you don't have as much control. You cede some of your control to other owners, whereas on a freehold property, you can do as you wish within reason, though, provided that your tenants don't cause a nuisance to your neighbours or indulge in any activity that's contrary to the planning permission.
Roy Cockayne, thanks very much indeed. Contributor to MoneyWeb. Well, I'm going to be very interested to see which way this actually goes. I suspect we'll see some developments changing their minds. They'll go from vote to vote, year to year. I think that's going to be very, very interesting. Roy, thanks. 8 minutes to 7.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
6 minutes to 7. Well, one of the dominant themes of the moment, the influence AI will have on our society. And time again, you'll have heard claims that AI robots, if I can call them that, will be doing what humans currently do. And in fact, you won't know if you're interacting with a person or with a piece of code. Well, Arthur Goldstuck suggesting in the Sunday Times yesterday, in fact, for most customers, authenticity is going to be the most important thing, and companies could make a big mistake if they get this wrong. Arthur's the founder of Worldwide Works. Arthur, good evening. You started with the story of Tilly, an AI creation that claimed to be a human but wasn't. It all happened online. What happened when people realized this person wasn't a person?
Good evening, Stephen. It's in a way a fun story, but also a cautionary tale for businesses. Essentially, most people were taken in by her being this up-and-coming actress. She was styling herself as an influencer, and she was posting images from very exotic locations. But there were clues that she was an AI creation, and a lot of people did pick up on that. And it was a kind of a wink and a nod to say, we know what you are, but we'll play along with you. The trouble really began when the creator of Tilly Norwood went to the Zurich Film Festival and in effect unveiled her as the next big up-and-coming star, and showcasing the fact that she was an AI creation, but also highlighting the fact that, or the claim, that agents were circling around them and she was going to be the next big thing, and some were describing her, according to the creators, as the next Scarlett Johansson. And I think that was the big mistake they made. If they just said, we're rolling out an AI actress, there have been others. There have been AI presenters as well, some almost as convincing as you, Stephen. But in terms of the performers, they were performing as AI, and it was part of the act, and it was to show what AI could do. What Tilly Norwood was doing was replacing performers, and that's exactly how she was being the market. So when the creators presented the film festival, they were in effect marketing her as the next big thing in movies, and the entire movie industry lashed out at her. The creators, the producers, the studios, and the actors themselves, a lot of Oscar-winning performers, in fact, criticizing severely what was going down there and saying that the industry has to stay far away from Tilly. And the creators then realized that they had gone too far, and they quickly, as I say, walked back the claim, just saying this is just another creative option. But the AI was out of the bag.
So, I mean, but weren't they all just defending their turf? So, I mean, let me put it like this. For years, one of the ways to sell washing powder is to have a person who is clearly a model pretending to be a mother of 3 children who all like to play soccer in the rain, right? I mean, we all kind of know this person's not a mother of 3 children. What's the difference now between that and this? I mean, so I hear you, but I don't know. I mean, is the difference that maybe we kind of know that the model is not really a mother? We're in on it?
Yes, it's exactly that. If you consider movie performers, movie actors, for example, they're embodying a role, but they're embodying a role, but it's the way they embody it. As, for example, let's say Marlon Brando would have embodied a role. It's a performance, but boy, oh boy, it's Marlon Brando as well, and you become almost transfixed by Brando's performance. Whereas what AI is doing is it averages out all the performances out there. It averages out human emotion and puts it out there. But what you say is an important point, because that is the counter-argument to this backlash, which is the fact that actors embody a role. They actually are pretending to be something they're not. But the key difference is that everyone knows, or at least when they're not suspending their sense of disbelief, they know that it's a performer. And in ads as well, it's a performer performing that specific role of the mother of 3 kids, or the guy who actually loves buying insurance. And we all know that doesn't actually happen. So when we are in on it, we're fine with it. But when you're pretending that it's real and then we discover it's not real, that's when the backlash happens. And that's, in a way, what's happening here.
So, with AI, you've got to be authentic to be a contender. Otherwise, you're just going to be a bum.
Yes, exactly. As some actor once said. But it's exactly that. The AI has to be seen as AI. And in effect, it's got to be authentic AI, not an AI pretending to be authentic human, because then you lose your audience.
Arthur Goldstuck, thanks so much, founder of Worldwide Works. That quote from Marlon Brando, courtesy of On the Waterfront, 7 o'clock.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025. 7 minutes after 7 the time. Well, plenty to coming up. We will speak a little bit more, and there'll be 1 or 2 interesting messages coming through about artificial intelligence. We'll speak about Friday's fascinating court judgment in the Constitutional Court, granting a parental leave both to the mother and the father. They can share it, is basically the deal. That's what was decided. In the past, it wasn't like that. Your business book review, The Power Elite by C. Wright Mills, a book written a long time ago about a country far, far away, but which has interesting implications for where we are today and about the elites in our society. I don't know if you know how you would define the elites in our society. Let me give you an obvious example. The president, obviously a member of the elite. The director general of the finance department, obviously a member of the elite. What about the leader of a trade union? Yes? No? They have lots of power? Probably not a lot of money? What about the principal of a prestigious school? What about the principal of a non-prestigious school? There's some very interesting debates you can have about what is a member of the elite, who is a member of the elite, and who isn't. And then don't forget my money this evening. Salamina Mosese, someone who's had a very interesting role. She's done all sorts of things over the years, been in the entertainment industry, pretty much since she was a child, writing books for kids now as well. And there's an art to writing children's books, not an easy thing. Looking forward to that conversation from 7:30 this evening. Good to hear from you. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes tonight on 072 702 1702. How do you know if you're a member of the elite? Because you can afford nuts in the nice section at Woolies. That's how you know.
WhatsApp Stephen
on 072
702
1702.
Well, voice notes coming through. We've been talking about AI tonight.
Good evening, Stephen, and great show as always. Very interesting conversations that you're having already. The one with Tilly Norwood, it just feels a lot like there was a movie called Simone in the 2000s. This sounds like a replica exactly of that. Just very interesting.
I remember that movie. Didn't the main character fall in love with her, in inverted commas? And it wasn't that kind of almost inevitable. That's what was going to happen. I think that's how it ended. But thank you for that. I saw today, and this happened late on Friday, I actually did see it over the weekend, that the Chief Investment Officer of the Public Investment Corporation, Kabelo Rekotso, has been suspended. We know very little about why. One presumes, and I hate to say this, and I say that with no inside knowledge whatsoever, but because much of the portfolio is listed, we kind of know what those investments are, and we know what was going on. But there have been some questions about the unlisted portfolio of the PIC, so I do wonder. It's just me wondering aloud if it's that. Maybe it isn't. But I must also just say that when the PIC does this, it is such a big organization that when its chief investment officer is suspended, I do think we can ask for more information. I do think we need to know about what, why. It's not enough to just say, well, this has happened, full stop. I mean, we really need to know why. And there's a new CEO there, and so there is a lot going on at the PIC, and I can't help but feel that when this happens and we're not told why, it leads to the worst kind of speculation. If I were in charge of communications for the PIC, I would be a little bit more forthcoming about what's going on there.
702.
702.
Stephen is on the Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Well, I'm sure you remember where you were, the exact moment when your children were born. I remember with crystal clear clarity the exact moment my son and daughter were born. And I can almost tell you, minute by minute, what happened on that day and in the first couple of days afterwards. And part of it was, in the middle of it all, I had to get out my phone and message my bosses and tell them this was the moment and that I'd now be taking my 10 days of paternity leave. Well, I was thinking about that on Friday when the Constitutional Court ruled that men and women, mothers and fathers, can now share parental leave. Until the ruling, only the mother of a newborn baby would take 4 months leave. Now that leave can be shared. Johan Grootes is Head of Employment and Compensation at Baker McKenzie. Johan, good evening. Before this ruling, we kind of understood the system. The father got 10 days, the mother got 4 months. Now they can share it. I can't help but feel this is going to be a little bit of a headache for a few human resource departments.
Stephen, good evening, and that will most certainly be the immediate upshot of it. Employers are going to have to relook, at the risk of stating the obvious, their parental leave policies and really make some quick adjustments to it. But I would love to think that the long-term effect of this is really positive, and this is something that we ought to be celebrating.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, we need more fathers to be more active in the lives of their children. Unfortunately, and I hate to be this guy, I would put a bet, I have no money and no research in front of me to prove this, that in most couples the man earns more than the woman, and companies and that couples might just decide to stick with what they would have done before.
And the fact that we have this gender pay gap, Stephen, is partially what informs a decision like this and should inform this, because there's a fair bit of research, especially if you start looking at the Scandinavian countries, about when we look at the gender pay gap. Essentially, it is referred to as the motherhood penalty. That by and large, women and men in the workplace track when it comes to remuneration, but once motherhood sets in, women suffer this motherhood penalty. So there's some really good research that's come out of Quebec in Canada, Norway, Spain, where they have gone the way of sharing parental leave. And the uptake, I've got stats here in front of me from Quebec that said that, once they started introducing non-transferable paid leave that is shared, the fatherhood participation rose by 250%. In Norway, they just recorded as rising dramatically. Spain also says big jumps in the uptake. So what we see is you start breaking down these stereotypes, and that's what the Concord referred to as well. That parenting, is a gender assigned role, and that it's the role of women, that should be the primary caregivers of children. And I mean, that just have so many other negative consequences attached to it. But that's a very long-winded way of saying, I agree that in the short term, we're going to feel some pain and we're going to have to find our way through this. And there may be rumblings of unfairness and business saying, but hang on, now my CEO is going to take leave and it's going to cost me an arm and a leg, whereas previously this would not have been the case. I think once we get over these initial rumblings, 5, 10, 20 years down the line, it would be a non-event, and this would just be the way in which we do things.
So one of the first things that needs to happen is that a company, so in the past, a company would know we employ someone who's about to be a mother or someone who's about to be a father, so we know roughly how much leave we're going to be asked to give them. Now they don't know that, but I would presume it is reasonable for a company to say to someone, we know that you're about to become a parent. How much leave are you getting, or how much leave are you going to ask for? And Johan, that's before we even start to make sure that the other parent isn't also taking the leave. And I don't know how companies are going to do that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think employees will always find themselves in a spot of bother if they are dishonest about the reason for taking leave. So there may be a situation where employee A can say to the company that employs them that, listen, I'm taking parental leave, but I'm going to take the full leave because, my spouse or partner doesn't want to take leave, and the other one does the same thing. But I would like to think of the normal course. Employees will recognize that they place themselves at a dismissal risk if they were to be caught doing that. So there may be some technological means for us to be able to deal with this as well, because one of the things that the Concord kept in abeyance is to say, listen, the unemployment insurance fund implications of this, that funds the payment of this leave, which is unpaid in most companies, that must still be amended as well. So it could be that all of this comes out in the wash when people start applying for UIF benefits in relation to the maternity, paternity, parental leave. But I think these are hurdles that are not insurmountable. The High Court interestingly said, listen, both should get 4 months. The Concord said no. Until Parliament sorts this out, the interim arrangement is we will stick to the 4 months that the birth mother previously would have gotten, and we'll add the 10 days that the other partner to the relationship would have received.
So that brings me obviously to the next point, which is that Parliament does need to kind of work out what it wants and get on with it quite quickly, if only to give companies a bit more direction.
It would be handy, and I think I'm loath to be overly critical of the legislature when this aspect was amended literally 2-3 years ago. Looking back at it now, it was probably a missed opportunity, because with what Parliament did was to bring this in line with what is generally the EU standard. But what they did not take into consideration, or certainly did not drive their thinking, it would appear, is to say, but when one scratches the surface, we have unfair discrimination on the in respect of gender that takes place when you start implementing these amendments. So, winding back the clock, we could have fixed all of this 2-3 years ago when we had the most recent changes to our parental leave setup. But the Concord has now given Parliament another 36 months, said, you sort it out, you come up with what you think is best, but in the interim, this is how we're going to deal with it.
Johan Grootes, thanks so much. Head of Employment and Compensation at Baker McKenzie. It's a fascinating and interesting thing. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Parliament deals with all of this. Hopefully, they'll actually be able to do it really quite quickly. 19 minutes after 7.
The Money Show.
Business Books.
Well, occasionally you will be thinking about or looking at something happening in South Africa, and it will remind you of a different set of circumstances in a different country. And I found that I'll often be reading a book. I've been reading one about what's been happening in Asia at the end of the Second World War. It's about the Tokyo trials, and it suddenly made me think about the long-term consequences of our history. There I am reading about Japan, and I'm thinking about the long-term consequences of our history simply because of what that trial meant for Japan. There's an interesting way of looking at another book. It's called The Power Elite by C. Wright Mills. And you'll know Dr. Ongama Mtimka, one of the foremost political thinkers in our country. He's been reading that book and thinking about what it means for us in this moment. Think of the Madlanga Commission, for example. Ongama is also the acting director of the Raymond Mhlaba Center for Governance and Leadership. Ongama, good evening. Firstly, the book, The Power Elite. C. Wright Mills was writing in the 1940s. He was writing about the US. He was trying to understand who kind of controlled things in that country at the time.
Good evening, Stephen and your listeners. Yes, I found myself, as I was grappling with the political economy of South Africa and wanting to understand at the core of our problems and potential solutions. What are the core issues? And I stumbled upon what I could only use, a term used by some people at Blanche called power constellations. And then started reading up on that and remembered that, in fact, somebody who contributed to thinking about, this concept of concentrated power in countries, the U.S. in particular, was Sir Wright Mills. And I've spent time reading about, what he says about the power elite and their interests and what they want. And it's been amazing watching developments of the Madlanga Commission and finding how it actually corresponds with what he talks about as the military in the U.S., but to us, maybe a nexus between underworld elements and security. So a underworld security nexus of sorts, so a complex of sorts. So, yeah, it's been fascinating and it's got interesting lessons for us today.
I mean, you talk about the Madlanga Commission. We see, warlords may be too strong a word, but you see people who are they have control over men with guns. Let me call them like that. And both kind of the criminal element and the police element. That's what they have in common. And we're kind of seeing a dispute like that playing out right in front of us right now.
Yeah, so interesting. It's interesting you are shy of using this word warlord. So Mills asks himself, what are the conditions that allow men of war to subject themselves to the power of civilian leaders? And what actually creates the conditions for them to step up in the fore and want to resolve issues? So as I listen to the rhetoric, the well-calculated strategy that Mkhwanazi used, which I was very supportive of, to me, it actually matches, because the rhetoric is, we are ready, let's meet on the field. And it underscores an answer for Mills that says, well, the men of war, when they perceive that their civilian leaders can interfere with the work of state security in such a way that national security can be undermined, they can, in fact, step up in the fore and begin to stamp their power. And it's interesting that Mkhwanazi does what he does, saying that he was being responsive to a very violent counter-offensive, and I'm paraphrasing, by people they had seen had been killing people, political killing staff team and the organized underworld that works with them. But yeah, so it's an interesting one. I think for me, what is also scary is now the warlords proper, those outside the state, outside the security, attempting to claim space for them, whether it's in economic sectors like construction or in dangerous activities, as Marx would say, in moving drugs and trafficking, or protecting turf in different sectors. So it's an interesting thing in that sense.
One of the key tests for me in a society is whether the elites change. In other words, whether one group of people are able to concentrate power and replicate it. So Russia's a good example. If you're not born into that elite, you're probably not going to get into that elite. The same could be true in South Africa before 1994. Or whether your elite can change. Now, I would argue that for a long time, the United States was a good example of whether people could fall out of the elite and go into the elite. But I think that that's become harder now. In our elite, can people fall out of it? Can people go into it?
Thank you. So we've had, for example, throughout history, people making reference to how the Broederbond brought together the corporate, the military, and the political. But that's been under a very clear transition. Some would like to argue that it actually remains pulling the strings, the white monopoly capital. But I began to panic last year as the order of 94 was crumbling, that in fact our grand narrative-esque approaches of looking at the high society of South Africa were too simplistic and not paying attention to the nuances and the changes that had taken place. How the political settlement of 94 started a process of transforming that elite, but also how we've seen rises of diverse groups like black-controlled groups of power elite that leverage political players, how they continue to contend with the so-called white monopoly capital. And an interesting one for me, Stephen, is the increasing power of union bosses in state, in crucial sectors of the state that are central to the economy, such as, for example, ports, rail, and others, and how that is an emerging power that needs us to explain today because it's got real consequences. So the point that Mills makes, if you allow me, he says, the power elite is composed of men whose positions enable them to transcend the ordinary environments of ordinary men and women. They are in positions to make decisions having major consequences. Whether they do or do not make such decisions is less important than the fact that they do occupy such pivotal roles. And lastly, he says, the failure to act or their failure to make decisions is itself an act that is often of greater consequence than the decisions that they do make. And look at how, for example, processes to transform certain sectors that are still controlled by the state now are more complicated, with union bosses very much being part of the power elite and countering, in some instances, the managerial elite, or having same power and same alignment in terms of thinking. So it's something I'm simply inviting us, especially within the political sciences and related disciplines and in the media, to begin to say, let us understand the new ways and the old ways in which power is wielded, and so that we can be able to go in this closer where the crux of the matter is in terms of how we transform society in South Africa.
Dr. Ngama Mtimka, so good to hear from you. Thank you. There's so much more to unpack around this. Such a great conversation. Dr. Mtimka is the acting director of the Raymond Mhlaba Center for Governance and Leadership.
The Money Show. How I make my money.
22 minutes to 8 the time. I think most of us are in where you are in a career because it's the culmination of a series of decisions you made at each point. So each time there'll be an opportunity or a choice, and you do what you think is the right thing at the time. And the culmination of all of those decisions is your career. Very few of us start at the beginning and say, I want to be X, and then sort of go that way. But for some people, you actually start very young. And when you look back, you almost wonder if it was sort of preordained. And one of those people who started quite young is the actor, producer, presenter, writes children's books as well, Salamina Mosese. And Salamina, good evening, and thanks so much for agreeing to spend some time with us on How I Make My Money on The Money Show.
Hello, Stephen. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I was looking through your Wikipedia page, and I was trying to work out how old you are when you first started working. And I'm not going to embarrass you, but you weren't very old when you started.
You know, I had an inkling that you might actually want to ask me. So let's put it this way. My daughter is currently 14. I was 14 by the time Soul Buddies made it onto air. So I started working at 13.
Sure.
And without doing the long math, I've been in the industry for 27 years this year.
It happens so quickly, trust me, I know. And I didn't even start at 14. I've often wondered, I've spoken to and worked with some people who were quite famous when they were quite young, kind of the age you're talking about. Most of them enjoyed it. I think sometimes there were moments. What was it like for you? Because you weren't a sort of KTV presenter. You were actually acting.
Yeah, so it actually was a little bit of both.
Yeah.
I was acting on Soul Buddies, and then even before Soul Buddies aired, I had auditioned for a kids show similar to KTV, so we were on Crazy on ETV. So the YoTV kids, the Crazy kids, and the KTV kids, we sort of all grew up together in the industry. And it was the best of times and the worst of times. Putting it quite honestly.
I mean, so I was going to say, was it hard work? And I imagine there are moments when it is hard work, and there are moments when actually it's the best thing, since sliced bread.
Yes, I think the trying to keep up with schoolwork, trying to have normal social life. I mean, we were teenagers, right? There's a lot going on in that space anyway, without adding employment onto that and all the expectations from adults, from other, your peers, etc. So that really is where sometimes the wheels start to come off. I think I really, I owe it to the support system and the kind of parenting that my parents had to do just to keep me on the straight and narrow. And also, I think for me, I always approached it as a job first. I understood we were having fun, but I had this thing in the back of my mind, it's work, it's work, it's work. And maybe, that's really where, if you don't compartmentalize, things really do start to get out of hand. School was always important to me. I was what in those days people termed a nerd. So I was a bookworm. When I wasn't doing the TV stuff, I was at home reading, just trying to, decompress. I found the fame element at such a young age really, really tricky. And I'll be honest, I think that is still to this day the hardest thing for me, navigating the industry, the fame part.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of being known for the role that you play rather than being a Salamina, and for that at quite a young age, that must have been quite tricky.
Yeah, I think you become the character that people see you portray. And lucky for us, we were a group of kids on Soul Buddies. We were trying to solve community problems, etc. So in a way, it sort of thrust us into that role model kind of world. So we were part of popular culture, but people saw us as, the good kids. And that brings its own pressures, right? So it was just about the understanding of there's also a responsibility that comes with the kind of characters that we were playing. I was a big sister. Everyone knew me as Zandi. And there's still people to this day who still say, I met you as Zandi, and to me, you're still Zandi. It doesn't matter how many other roles I've played since then. Yeah. Moving
from that kind of era of playing children and teenagers, or of, this might come out in the wrong way, or sort of being young on air, right? So you're portraying this young person, and now you're becoming a young adult, so 19, 20, 21, 22, tough years for a lot of young women. And now it's in the public eye, and you've got to kind of pivot towards something else. How difficult was that? Because you've got to now look for work, and you can't just be the kind of cute 13-year-old. You've actually got to be Salamina. Yeah.
I think that's, we've got very famous examples, the Britney Spears, the Christinas, and there's been quite a few documentaries made about that era of child star and how wrong it can go. And we've got real life examples of where it did really go wrong. What really helped me, I think, and Stefina Zwane, who's my business partner now, we were at varsity at the time. So that's first year for us. And for us, we were students trying to survive. We were working to pay for textbooks. We were rushing off to studio, then coming back for lecturers. And it was the balancing of life as we knew it, with all of this kind of noise happening around us. And then social media came later. So I always say I take my hat off to people who came into the industry when already social media was a thing. People laugh when I say we didn't have social media when we were on. So, if you didn't see me physically in a shop, you were only interacting with me on the screen, in a newspaper or in the magazine or on radio, right? And suddenly the advent of social media came, and that's really where all, the pivoting of it and different decisions. And that's why I decided I'm not going to study something that is directly related to like drama per se. I did corporate communications. I always had an understanding that I do have other interests, and maybe this TV thing ends. And yes, like you correctly say, you go to a couple of auditions and suddenly you're not that cute kid anymore. And you're in that awkward phase where you're not quite old enough to play adult characters like a CEO or whatever. But you're also not young enough to be in the school uniform anymore. So it's that awkward middle that we all had to navigate. And for me, what was my saving grace was I got a degree in a completely different field. It's adjacent to what I was already doing, but I was honing different skill sets that would stand me in good stead for what the future held for me.
I think what can happen if you're in the public eye in the way that you were is that people judge you, will often judge a person on their last performance, whether it's their last song or their last acting gig or their last sort of character they played. And it can be really important to give yourself something else on which you can be assessed by, which listening to you sounds like what you were doing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, very few people know that at some point I just completely crashed. And I was over it. The stress of having had to, start so young and all of that. And I went into the corporate world. And I was assistant communications in a non-governmental organization. And it was fun for me because I had to really find a way to build a life outside of the industry. And then, of course, I missed it, right? Because when you're a creative, it's more than just a job for us. There's just this yearning for creating things or being a part of things that will outlive us. Or, change narratives, change minds, inspire, spark conversations. And, I did the corporate thing for 2 years and then came back. And I went straight back to the acting. And then soon after that, I thought I'm also at that age where now producing is really fascinating for me. I've been around enough sets now. I really want to get dirty with what does it look like when I also co-create and produce and own these shows that I want to be the face of, etc. And start to spotlight other people and create new stars.
I was looking you up on Google today, Salomina, that would have been me, and different sites said you were famous for different roles. So one said backstage, which I think maybe had a big impact on your personal life. We'll get to that in a moment. Another said Sevendelaan. Does it surprise you? I mean, normally when you Google someone like yourself, there's a kind of, famous for this, But for you, it doesn't seem to have been like that. And I thought maybe that was a strength.
I guess. I didn't actually know that about myself. So for me, how I was choosing my roles, is, and I will also say, Stephen, navigating this industry, there's a lot of grace and a lot of magic and a lot of, things outside of our control that happen.
Yeah.
So I won't pretend that it was always my own perfectly made plans that helped me to build the career that I've had to sustain for the past 27 years. But there were times where I was like, I want to play a strong, CEO kind of woman. And that's really the role I played on Sevendelaan. But for me, on the other end, is that I challenged myself to act for the first time in 2 languages and be directed in Afrikaans. Of course, I'd done Afrikaans at school,
sure.
But, acting in Afrikaans and knowing how to do begripstoets are two very different things. So I always tried to, I think for the growth of it, so that I don't get bored, I always had this thing of, I don't want to be typecast, so I've played the good girl. I don't only want to do that. And then the next thing came, and the next thing. And, my first acting award actually came playing the role of Ella Kekana. I was a domestic worker. And for the first time, I was in a comedy. And everyone, I remember I fought so hard to even get the producers to give me the role because I had just come off top billing as a presenter. And they said there's no way Salamina is going to be able to pull from wherever to really portray this character. And I was so excited when that Abomzala role gave me a SAFTA for Best Actress in a Comedy. So for me, it's just about growth and pushing myself and trying new things, because it's also like a roll of the dice. You don't know if it's going to work, so it's just been exciting for me to allow myself the space. And I think my husband is the same. We're both creatives. For us, it's always, I don't want to be pigeonholed, because, the Salamina who started 20 years ago is so different to the Salamina who is now a mom. And navigating new things and new challenges and inspired by new things. And that's really why maybe it would be that some people would say famous for this, famous for that. And then now, a whole new journey with the books. The kids don't even care that I'm a superstar. I have lots to ask you about the books. Salamina Mosese is our guest on How I Make My Money tonight on The Money Show, 8 minutes to 8.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
The Money Show, How I Make My Money.
Salamina Mosese is the actress, producer, and entrepreneur. And I should mention also an author, Salamina. You've written 2 books, Disaster at Gogo Spaza and Cook Off at Gogo Spaza. And I mean, I've gone through a phase of telling my children's stories, and it's harder than it sounds. But I wondered if one of the reasons that you had written these books may be because there are actually so few South African children's books written for South African children.
It's exactly that. And at the time when I wrote my first one, and actually I've written 3 children's books now, but I'll tell you about the third one. Let's talk firstly about the 2 you mentioned. So those are my 10 chapter books. And that series was actually started during COVID, during lockdown, when, as you know, parents were losing their minds. We just didn't know how to keep kids entertained, inspired, excited about learning, etc. And my daughter at the time was reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and I was just fascinated watching her and how she enjoyed it. So I had these conversations with her to ask, what is it about these books, and why not this one, and why this one? And yes, I had run out of South African books at the time because she had graduated from the picture book reading age. She was now reading chapter books, and I couldn't find any. I tried. I was always ordering from, online bookshops, etc. And then I thought, this has sparked my new thing. But I didn't necessarily intend to release the book at first. I registered for a short writing course, and that's how Disaster at Gogo Spaza was born. It was my sort of, what you hand in at the end of the course, and they graded it. And then it was an email from my lecturer, and she said, Salamina, you've created something really special here. I think you need to, try and get it published. And I said, what? Really? Are you serious? Point me in a direction. She sent me an email address. I Googled how to sell your book to a publisher. And that's really, literally how this journey started.
Sure.
Publisher got it. She read it and she said, it's a yes from me. I'm on maternity leave. Give me 3 months. And the rest is history.
Sure.
And for me, really, Stephen, I grew up in Soweto. For me, the most exciting thing were the adventures I would go on when I would walk with my paternal grandmother to the spaza shop. And that's why that became the world of my first 2 books.
And it's also, I'm sorry to interrupt, it's so important for South African children to see themselves and their lives replicated in a book. It gives them a sense of importance. Because otherwise, firstly, the stories just aren't interesting because they're sort of foreign. But secondly, it says that only other lives are important.
Exactly. And it's about the ordinary, because that's also what I wanted to do with the first 2 books. I said, there's no fantasy. These kids, you know, Gogo runs a spaza shop. It's called Gogo's Goodies. They visit Gogo for the holidays. It's 3 cousins. They're obviously getting up to some naughty stuff. So I really modeled it on that kind of lighthearted, you know, there's messaging in there, but that's not what the book is about. What kids have picked up on is, I love this character because he's naughty, and I love how the kids took over the spaza shop for the day, and and then parents have said to me, I like how you've made Gogo so warm. She's strict, but she loves these kids. She dotes on them. So it's exactly that. It's our South African stories matter, how we think, our perspective, what is our lived experience, and something as ordinary as, you know, having to grow up around this small business that is run from the yard can become this magical world. The follow-up cook-off was now about a cooking competition, and now it's Gogo who's entering this competition, but it's still the kids who said, you can do it, Gogo. You know, so it's my love letter to our food, our families, our history. And, you know, that's really all the themes that I'm playing with.
Salamina, it's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much. The last half hour has really flown by. Salamina Mosese, author, but also presenter, actor, and a producer as well. Salamina, thank you so much.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking. Absa is a proud lead sponsor of B20 South Africa 2025.
Well, U.S. markets still in flux over AI. The Dow Jones down 0.13%, the Nasdaq up 0.76%, the S&P 500 up 0.45%. A lot more news to come. Aubrey is next. We'll chat again tomorrow. Good evening. It's 8 o'clock.